They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but Eleanor Sterling decided to serve hers frozen on Christmas Eve. Her husband, Marcus, thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought he could leave his 8-month pregnant wife alone in a blizzard to ski in Aspen with his 23-year-old mistress. He thought he'd come home to a warm fire and a forgiving wife. Instead, he came home to a house that wasn't just empty, it was erased. No furniture, no art, no money, and no wife. This is the true story of how one woman turned a billionaire's arrogance into his absolute ruin. You might want to sit down for this one. It gets messy. The notification on the iPhone screen didn't even make a sound. It was just a silent flash of light against the marble countertop of the kitchen island. But for Eleanor Sterling, it was louder than a gunshot. Flight confirmed. Aspen awaits, baby. XOXO. See. Eleanor stared at the phone. Her hand, resting on her swollen stomach, went cold. She was 8 months pregnant. Her ankles were swollen, and she had spent the last 3 hours directing the florists on exactly how to drape the garlands over the grand staircase of their $12 million estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Everything all right, Elle? Marcus walked into the kitchen, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Tom Ford suit. He was 42, handsome in that jagged, aggressive way that Wall Street loved. He smelled of sandalwood and expensive scotch. He looked at his wife, at the fatigue under her eyes, the messy bun, the oversized cashmere sweater, and for a split second, his lip curled. Just a fraction, but Eleanor saw it. She slid his phone face down. "Just checking the time," she lied, her voice steady. "Are you sure you have to go tonight, Marcus? It's Christmas Eve. The baby has been kicking all afternoon." Marcus sighed, the performance of the weary provider beginning instantly. "Elena, you know the deal. The merger with the Japanese firm is falling apart. If I don't fly to Tokyo tonight to smooth things over with Sato, we lose the portfolio. I'm doing this for us, for the family." "Tokyo," the text had said, Aspen. "Tokyo," Elena repeated. "Right. I'll be back on the 27th, he said, walking over and pecking her on the forehead. It was a dry, hollow kiss. "Don't wait up. The driver is outside." He grabbed his phone, not checking it, and grabbed his carry-on. It was a Louis Vuitton duffel, packed light. Too light for a business trip to Japan, but perfect for a weekend of skiing and expensive champagne with Chloe, the 23-year-old junior analyst he'd been mentoring for the past 6 months. Elena watched him walk to the door. "Marcus?" He paused, hand on the brass knob. "What is it, Elena? I'm late." "I love you," she said. It wasn't a declaration. It was a test. "Yeah, you too," he muttered, and then the heavy oak door slammed shut. Elena stood in the silence of the massive, meticulously decorated house. She heard the growl of the Porsche 911 starting up in the driveway. Not the limo to the airport, but his personal car. He wasn't going to JFK. He was driving to Teterboro Airport for a private charter. She waited until the taillights disappeared down the long, winding driveway. Then she walked to the window. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the manicured lawns in pristine white. She didn't cry. Tears were for women who had hope, and Elena had just lost the last shred of hers. Instead, she walked to the wall safe, hidden behind the Renoir in the study. She spun the dial. Her birthday, of course. Marcus was too narcissistically lazy to remember any other code. Inside were the deeds, the titles, the power of attorney documents. 3 years ago, Marcus had been under investigation by the SEC for insider trading. Terrified of losing his assets, he had transferred the title of the Greenwich House, the Hamptons Beach House, and the majority of his liquid assets into Eleanor's name. It was a temporary shield. But after the investigation was dropped due to a technicality, Marcus had been too busy and too arrogant to transfer them back. He assumed Elena was too docile, too in love, and too pregnant-brained to understand the leverage she held. Elena pulled the papers out. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had saved months ago, back when she first smelled the sandalwood perfume on his collar, but was too afraid to ask. "Hello?" A gruff voice answered. "Mr. Henderson?" Elena said, her voice turning to steel. "This is Eleanor Sterling. I'm ready to sell. Everything. But there's a condition." "On Christmas Eve, Mrs. Sterling?" the estate liquidator asked, shocked. "Yes. Tonight. And I want it cash. And I want the house empty by sunrise." The hours between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. were a blur of organized chaos. Mr. Henderson, a man who specialized in distressed asset liquidation for the ultra-wealthy, arrived with a team of 12 men and 3 large box trucks. They didn't ask questions. They only cared about the inventory. "The art?" Henderson asked, pointing to the original Basquiat in the hallway, Marcus's pride and joy. It was worth $4 million alone. "Take it," Elena said, sipping herbal tea. 50 cents on the dollar if you wire the money to the offshore account I provided within the hour." Henderson's eyes widened. "Done!" They took the Italian leather sofas. They took the antique chandeliers. They took the 85-inch televisions. They even took the contents of Marcus's wine cellar, 300 bottles of vintage Bordeaux and rare whiskies. Elena moved through the house like a ghost, directing the dismantling of her own life. She went into the master bedroom and opened Marcus's closet. He loved his suits, custom-made Italian wool. She watched as the movers bundled them into garbage bags. "Burn those," she told one of the workers, handing him a $100 bill. "Or give them to the homeless shelter. Just get them out." By 2 a.m. the house echoed. It was a cavernous shell. The only thing remaining was a single wooden chair in the center of the living room and the Christmas tree, stripped of its ornaments, standing dark and ominous in the corner. But Elena wasn't done. She sat on the wooden chair and opened her laptop. She logged into their joint brokerage account. Marcus was the trader, but Elena was the one who managed the passwords. She watched the numbers on the screen. Total portfolio value, $28,450,000. With a few clicks, she initiated a liquidation of the entire portfolio. Because the accounts were technically joint tenants with rights of survivorship, and because she had the power of attorney he signed 3 years ago during his panic, the bank didn't flag it. She transferred the funds, minus a hefty tax withholding to keep the IRS off her back, into a complex web of trusts she had set up 2 days ago in the Cook Islands. Then she composed an email. To the Board of Directors, Sterling Capital subject, whistleblower evidence regarding Marcus Sterling. Attached were PDF scans of the creative accounting ledgers Marcus kept in the safe. The proof of the Ponzi-like structure he was running with the pension funds. It was enough to put him away for 20 years. She set the email to send on December 26th at 9 a.m., right when the markets opened. Finally, at 5 a.m., the snow had stopped. The trucks were gone. The house was stripped bare. The accounts were empty. Eleanor walked to the garage. The only car left was her modest SUV. Marcus's collection, the vintage Jaguar, the Ferrari, the Aston Martin, had been loaded onto flatbeds an hour ago, sold to a private collector in New Jersey for a lump cash sum. She put her hand on her belly. "We're going to be okay, little one," she whispered. "Better than okay." She took one last look at the cold, empty mansion that had been her prison. She didn't leave a note. Notes gave closure, and she wanted Marcus to have nothing but questions. She got into a car, threw her phone out of the window into a snowbank, and drove toward the Canadian border. December 27th. Marcus Sterling felt fantastic. The skiing in Aspen had been mediocre, but Chloe had been enthusiastic. He was tanned, relaxed, and buzzing with the adrenaline of having gotten away with it yet again. He had told Elena his flight from Tokyo landed at noon, so he timed his arrival back at the Greenwich house for 1 p.m. He pulled the Porsche 911 into the driveway. He frowned. The driveway hadn't been plowed. The snow was deep, compacted into ice. "Lazy landscaping crew," he muttered, making a mental note to fire them. He parked and grabbed his bag, preparing his face for the exhausted husband returning from business look. He unlocked the front door. "Elena, I'm home. The flight was absolute hell. You won't believe the turbulence," he called out, dropping his keys in the foyer bowl. The keys hit the ceramic with a loud, echoing clatter that sounded wrong. Marcus looked up. He blinked. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. The foyer was empty. The console table was gone. The mirror was gone. The Persian runner rug was gone. "Elena!" Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at his chest. He ran into the living room. Empty. Just the hardwood floors gleaming in the winter sun. He ran to the kitchen. The Sub-Zero fridge was there. It was built in. But the stools were gone. The espresso machine was gone. He yanked open the drawers. No silverware, no plates, nothing. "Elena!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Is this a joke? Where are you?" He sprinted up the stairs, his footsteps booming in the hollow house. Master bedroom. Empty. No bed. No nightstands. He threw open his closet door. Bare walls. Not a single suit. Not a single tie. Not even a wire hanger. He stood there, hyperventilating. Was it a robbery? A kidnapping? But why would robbers take the clothes and the silverware? He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he dropped it twice. He dialed Eleanor. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." He dialed the police. 911, what is your emergency? My wife is missing. And my house. Someone robbed my entire house," Marcus yelled. "Sir, calm down. What is your address?" 14. Oakwood Lane. Send someone now. He hung up and instinctively went to the wall safe to check for the emergency cash and his passport. He moved the spot where the Renoir painting used to hang. The safe door was wide open. Inside there was a single piece of paper. It wasn't a note from Eleanor. It was a receipt. Sold to Henderson Liquidations. Item: contents of 14 Oakwood Lane. Seller: Eleanor Sterling, owner. Total: paid in full. Marcus stared at the paper. The room spun. "Owner," he whispered. He remembered the transfer deeds, the tax dodge. He scrambled to check his bank accounts on his phone. Access denied. Account frozen. He tried his credit card app. Card cancelled. Then his phone rang. It wasn't Elena. It was the head of legal from Sterling Capital. "Marcus." The lawyer's voice was icy, devoid of their usual camaraderie. "Don't bother coming into the office. The FBI is here. They have your ledgers. They have everything. My advice: don't say a word to anyone." The line went dead. Marcus stood in the center of the empty room, the silence pressing in on him like a physical weight. He sank to his knees. The winter sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air where his life used to be. The silence in the empty Greenwich house didn't last long. It was broken by the wail of sirens. Not one, but 3 vehicles. 2 local police cruisers and an unmarked black SUV screeched to a halt at the bottom of the icy driveway. Marcus, still on his knees, watched through the living room window as uniformed officers and men in FBI windbreakers swarmed his property. They weren't there to investigate a robbery. They were there for the whistleblower complaint filed at 9 a.m. that morning. The arrest was humiliatingly public. The neighbors across the street, the Vanderbilts, were watching from their bay window, sipping coffee as Marcus was marched out in handcuffs, wearing the same ski jacket he'd returned from Aspen in. He didn't even have a coat suitable for a court appearance. At the federal holding facility in Lower Manhattan, the reality set in. He was processed, fingerprinted, and stripped of his remaining dignity. He was allowed one phone call. He knew his high-powered legal team wouldn't touch him. The evidence Eleanor sent was radioactive. His friends on Wall Street were already erasing his number from their phones. There was only one person left. Chloe. He dialed her number with trembling fingers. She picked up on the second ring. "Marcus, where are you? I've been seeing crazy things on the news. It's all a misunderstanding, baby," Marcus pleaded, his voice raspy. "Elena, she went crazy. She set me up, but I'll fix it. I just need bail money. My accounts are frozen temporarily. I need you to spot me." Silence stretched on the line. "Chloe, are you there? I need 50 grand for the bondsman. You know I'm good for it once this blows over." Then came a sound Marcus had never heard from Chloe before. A cold, sharp laugh. 50 grand? Marcus, are you insane? You don't have 50 cents. What are you talking about? I'm Marcus Sterling. Not anymore, Chloe said, her voice devoid of the babyish lilt she used in Aspen. "I've seen the reports, the Ponzi scheme, the fraud. You're done. And frankly, you were getting boring anyway. All that talk about your vision. God, it was exhausting pretending to listen." Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Pretending. Chloe, Aspen, what we had was a transaction, she cut in. "I provided an ego boost for a midlife crisis billionaire, and you provided trips and jewelry. But the transaction is void if the billionaire is broke. Oh, and Marcus, that Cartier bracelet you bought me in Aspen, I already pawned it this morning when the news broke. Got a great price." "You bitch," he whispered. "Merry Christmas, Marcus," she said, and the line went dead. Marcus stared at the receiver. He was truly alone. The smartest guy in the room was sitting in a concrete cell, realizing that the two women in his life had simultaneously played him. One for justice, one for sport. He leaned his head against the cold cinder-block wall, and for the first time since he was a child, began to weep. Not tears of remorse, but tears of pure, impotent rage. 2,000 miles away, the world was silent and blue. Elena, now known as Nora Vance, thanks to a passport she'd procured through very expensive back channels years ago as a just-in-case, stood on the deck of a small, sturdy cabin overlooking a frozen lake in rural Nova Scotia, Canada. It was devastatingly cold, -20 degrees, but the cold felt clean. It felt honest. Unlike the climate-controlled perfection of Greenwich, this cold demanded respect. She had chosen this place because it was off the grid. No cell service, satellite internet only, and the nearest neighbor was 3 miles down an unpaved logging road. She had paid for the cabin in cash, bought a used Subaru Outback, and stocked the pantry for 6 months. Her pregnancy had become difficult in the last few weeks. The stress of the execution, the selling, the running, the constant checking under her shoulder had taken its toll. On January 15th, during a howling nor'easter that buried her Subaru in 4 feet of snow, her water broke. There was no time to get to the small hospital in the nearest town, 40 miles away. Eleanor, alone in the cabin with the wind screaming outside, had to rely on the stack of birthing books she'd read and a primal instinct she didn't know she possessed. It was 12 hours of agony. She screamed into a rolled-up towel, gripping the iron bed frame until her knuckles turned white. She channeled every ounce of hatred she had for Marcus into pushing. At 4:32 a.m., as the storm finally broke, a cry echoed in the cabin. It was a boy. She wrapped him in warm flannel blankets and held him close to her skin, weeping uncontrollably. She named him Leo, after her grandfather, a man who had worked with his hands and never lied to anyone. Over the next few weeks, Elena existed in a bubble of exhaustion and fierce love. She nursed Leo by the wood stove, watching the snow fall. She felt a profound shift inside herself. The old Elena, the one who hosted dinner parties and tolerated Marcus's condescension, was dead. Nora Vance was a survivor. When Leo was sleeping, she opened her encrypted laptop. She used a VPN that bounced her signal through 3 different countries before accessing the news. She read about Marcus's arrest, the denial of bail because he was deemed a flight risk. Ironic, she thought. The appointment of a public defender because he claimed indigence. She saw the paparazzi photos of him being led into court. He looked 10 years older. His hair was graying at the temples, his arrogant posture replaced by a slump of defeat. Elena felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was colder than she expected. It wasn't joy. It was just accounting. The books were balancing. But then she read an article in the Wall Street Journal detailing the scope of the investigation. The FBI was looking for the missing assets. They knew about the liquidation. They knew about the offshore transfers. They just couldn't crack the Cook Islands trusts yet. The article ended with a quote from the lead prosecutor, U.S. Attorney Sarah Jenkins. Marcus Sterling didn't act alone. We believe his wife, Elena Sterling, currently a fugitive, was instrumental in laundering the proceeds of his crimes. We will find her, and she will face justice. Elena slammed the laptop shut. Her heart hammered against her ribs, waking Leo, who began to fuss. She wasn't just a victim anymore in the eyes of the law. She was an accomplice. Marcus was spinning the narrative, even from jail. He was dragging her down with him. She picked up Leo, rocking him desperately. The sanctuary of the frozen north suddenly felt very fragile. She realized the hardest part wasn't leaving Marcus. It was staying gone. The Southern District of New York Federal Courthouse was a place designed to make powerful men feel small. But Marcus Sterling had never felt small in his life. Even now, sitting at the defendant's table in a suit that was a size too large, a consequence of 6 months of prison food and chronic stress, he maintained the posture of a CEO chairing a board meeting. But beneath the table, his leg was bouncing with the manic energy of a trapped animal. The trial had been dragging on for 3 weeks. The prosecution, led by the relentless U.S. Attorney Sarah Jenkins, was not just winning. They were performing an autopsy on his life while he was still breathing. Jenkins was systematic, cold, and brilliant. She didn't shout. She simply projected spreadsheets onto the massive monitors for the jury, tracing the lines of fraud like veins in a body. "Mr. Patel," Marcus hissed, leaning toward his court-appointed attorney. "Do something. She's putting the jury to sleep, and when they wake up, they're going to convict me just to go home." Rajiv Patel, a man with the patience of a saint and the tired eyes of a public defender who carried a caseload of 60 felonies, didn't look up from his notepad. "She's presenting the wire transfers, Marcus. Facts are boring, but facts are also what send people to prison. We have to wait for cross-examination." "Cross-examination?" Marcus scoffed, his voice rising just enough for the bailiff to shoot him a warning glare. "You're going to ask her if she's sure I stole the money? Look at them." He gestured subtly to the jury box. "They hate me. They see a rich guy who lost their grandmother's pensions. We need a narrative shift. We need a villain that isn't me." The lunch recess was called. As the jury filed out, avoiding eye contact with the defense table, Marcus was shackled and led to a small, windowless conference room in the holding area. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. Patel sat down and opened a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Marcus stared at him with undisguised contempt. "I'm firing you," Marcus said. "You can't," Patel replied calmly. "Judge Holloway already denied your request for new counsel last week. You claimed indigence, remember? You don't have the funds for a private firm, and the court isn't going to delay this trial again." Marcus slammed his handcuffed fists onto the metal table. "Then start acting like a shark. Listen to me, Rajiv. The strategy we have, the I was negligent but not criminal defense, is failing. We need to pivot. Today." "Pivot to what?" Patel asked, wiping mustard from his lip. "The evidence is overwhelming. Your signature is on the accounts. Your IP address is on the transfers." Marcus leaned forward, a dark, predatory glint entering his eyes. He had been saving this card. He knew it was risky. It was nuclear. But Marcus Sterling operated on a scorched earth policy. If he was going to burn, he would make sure the fire consumed everyone. "We pivot to the truth," Marcus lied, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Or at least, a version of it that creates reasonable doubt. You keep painting Elena as the victim, the poor, pregnant wife who fled the big bad wolf. But look at the facts, Rajiv. Who actually liquidated the assets? Elena. Who moved the money to the Cook Islands? Elena. Who vanished with $28 million while I stayed here to face the music?" Patel paused. "She fled because she discovered the fraud." "Did she?" Marcus smiled, and it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Or did she flee because the partnership went sour? Think about it. I'm the face of the company. I do the handshakes, the dinners, the TV interviews. But the back end, the logistics? Elena was a math major before she was a trophy wife. She handled the books at home. She had the passwords. You're suggesting your wife was the mastermind?" Patel looked skeptical, but his pen hovered over his notebook. "I'm suggesting," Marcus said, gaining momentum, "that Vista Holdings, the shell company Jenkins is pinning the bribery charges on, wasn't mine. It was hers. She set it up, she managed it, and when the heat got too hot, she cashed out my legitimate accounts, framed me for her side hustle, and ran." "Marcus," Patel warned, "if we introduce this theory, we need proof. Do you have proof she ran Vista Holdings?" "I have something better than proof," Marcus said. "I have absence. She's not here to defend herself, is she? She's a fugitive. In the eyes of the law, flight implies guilt. If we argue that I was merely a pawn in her scheme, a husband blinded by love, signing whatever papers his brilliant, manipulative wife put in front of him, it creates doubt. And doubt is all I need." Patel rubbed his temples. "It's a gone girl defense. It's incredibly high risk. The prosecution will tear it apart if they find one email linking you to Vista." "They won't," Marcus said confidently. "I was careful with Vista. I never used my work email. I used shared devices." He didn't mention that he had used her login credentials while she was hospitalized. He just needed Patel to file the motion. "Do it," Marcus commanded. "File the motion. Leak the theory to the press. Paint her as the Black Widow of Wall Street. Make the jury wonder if the real criminal is the woman sipping Mai Tais on a beach with their money, not the man sitting in this cell." The following morning, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted violently. Patel, following his client's instructions, abandoned the negligence defense. During his cross-examination of the lead FBI agent, he began to ask questions that sent a ripple of confusion through the gallery. "Agent Miller?" Patel asked. "Is it true that the wire transfers on December 24th were initiated by Elena Sterling?" "Yes," the agent replied. "We believe she was liquidating assets to escape." To escape? Patel pressed. Or to profit? Is it not true that currently Mrs. Sterling is in possession of nearly $30 million of investor funds, while my client has zero? That is accurate, technically. And is it not true, Patel continued, his voice rising, that the signatory for the shell company Vista Holdings is E. Sterling? Yes, but no further questions. By noon, the narrative had breached the walls of the courthouse. The media, starved for a twist in what had been a dry financial crimes trial, devoured the new angle. Headlines shifted from Sterling swindle to Sterling says she did it. By evening, the cable news cycle was dominated by the gold digger defense. Pundits argued over whether Elena was a victim or a villain. Photos of her from charity galas, wearing diamonds, looking poised and intelligent, were analyzed. "Does this look like a scared housewife?" one commentator asked on Fox News. "Or does it look like a woman who knows exactly where the bodies are buried because she dug the holes?" Marcus, back in his cell, watched the small television mounted on the wall. He saw the polling numbers shifting. Public sympathy for the abandoned pregnant wife was eroding, replaced by suspicion. He smiled. He knew Elena. He knew her anxiety. He knew her need for control. He knew that seeing her name dragged through the mud would hurt her more than the loss of the money. He was counting on it, flushing her out. 2,000 miles north, the world was not made of marble floors and TV screens, but of ice and timber. Elena, now Nora Vance, sat on the floor of the cabin in Nova Scotia. The fire in the wood stove had burned down to embers, casting a dull, dying orange glow across the room. The winter had been brutal. The snow was piled 6 feet high against the walls of the cabin, insulating them but also burying them. For months, she had lived in a state of hypervigilance, jumping at the sound of the wind, flinching when the grocery store clerk in the nearest village looked at her too long. She had created a routine to stay sane. Chop wood, melt snow for water when the pipes froze, feed Leo, read, sleep, repeat. She had convinced herself that she was safe here, that the world had moved on, that Marcus was a ghost from a past life who could no longer touch her. She was wrong. Her laptop was open on the rough-hewn coffee table. She had established a strict rule. Check the news once a week, for 10 minutes only, using a VPN routed through 3 different countries. Today was the day. She stared at the screen, her hand clamped over her mouth to stifle a sob that was trying to claw its way out. Defense claims fugitive wife architect of fraud. Where is Elena? Billionaire husband begs wife to return money to victims. The gone girl of Greenwich, inside the mind of Elena Sterling. She clicked on a video clip. It was Marcus's lawyer, Patel, speaking on the courthouse steps. "My client is a victim of a profound betrayal," Patel said to a sea of microphones. Marcus Sterling trusted his wife. He gave her power of attorney. He gave her control of his accounts. And how did she repay him? She stole his fortune, abandoned him to face the consequences of her financial machinations, and kidnapped his child. We are appealing to the public. If you see Elena Sterling, do not approach her. She is desperate, she is wealthy, and she is the true mastermind behind the Sterling capital collapse. Elena slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small room. She scrambled backward until her back hit the sofa, breathing hard, her chest heaving. "He's doing it," she whispered. "He's actually doing it." It was a masterclass in gaslighting, performed on a national stage. He wasn't just defending himself, he was rewriting reality. He was taking the one thing she had left, her integrity, the truth that she had left to save herself and her son, and twisting it until she looked like a monster. She looked over at the crib where 5-month-old Leo was sleeping. He was swaddled in a thick wool blanket, his cheeks rosy from the cold air of the cabin. Marcus didn't care about Leo. He hadn't mentioned his son once in the press conference. He only mentioned the money. He only mentioned the kidnapping. He was using their child as a prop to make her look unstable. Panic began to set in. Real, visceral panic. She thought about the man at the gas station yesterday who had looked at her Subaru a little too long. She thought about the satellite internet technician who had come last month. Did they recognize her? If she stayed here, they would find her. The FBI was now looking for a mastermind, not a witness. The manhunt would intensify. But if she ran, where would she go? She had a baby. She couldn't live in motels forever. She stood up and walked to the window. The reflection in the glass showed a woman she barely recognized. Her hair was chopped short and dyed a dull brown. She wore flannel and thermal leggings. She looked tired. She looked weak. "That's what he wants," she said aloud. "He wants me to be weak. He wants me to be scared." She pressed her forehead against the freezing glass. Marcus was betting on the old Elena. The Elena who apologized when the waiter got her order wrong. The Elena who signed whatever papers he put in front of her because she didn't want to start a fight. The Elena who believed that if she was just good enough, he would love her. But that Elena had died on the night of Christmas Eve. A cold, hard resolve began to crystallize in her chest, sharper than the ice hanging from the eaves. Marcus had made a fatal error. By blaming her, by claiming she was the mastermind behind specific shell companies like Vista Holdings, he had moved the battleground from vague accusations to specific data points. He had introduced facts that could be checked. Elena knew she didn't set up Vista Holdings. She knew she hadn't signed those papers. And if she hadn't signed them, that meant Marcus had forged her signature. She turned back to the laptop. She didn't close it this time. She opened it. She wasn't going to run. Running was for victims. She sat down at the table, her hands steady for the first time in months. She wasn't a hacker. She wasn't a lawyer. But she was a mother with $30 million in offshore accounts and nothing left to lose. She navigated to a search engine and typed in a query. She wasn't looking for a flight. She wasn't looking for a new hideout. She was looking for the one thing Marcus feared more than prison. The digital footprint he thought he had erased. "You want a mastermind, Marcus?" she whispered to the glowing screen. "I'll give you one." She began to type. The hunt was over. The war had just begun. The cabin in Nova Scotia, once a sanctuary of silence and snow, had transformed overnight into a cage. Elena, still living under the alias Nora Vance, sat in the dark, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating a face that had grown harder, sharper. The baby, Leo, was asleep in his crib, his soft breathing the only rhythm in a room thick with panic. On the screen, the New York Post article stared back at her. "The Black Widow of Wall Street," the headline screamed. Below it was the photo Marcus had released to the press, a picture from their engagement party 5 years ago. Elena looked young, naive, and radiantly happy. It was a weaponized image, designed to make the public hate her. Marcus was spinning a narrative that she wasn't a victim of infidelity, but a cold-blooded sociopath who had framed her husband to run off with millions. Elena felt a physical sickness in her gut. Marcus knew her better than she thought. He knew that Eleanor Sterling, the perfectionist, the people-pleaser, would be paralyzed by public shame. He was betting on her staying hidden, letting him rewrite history until he walked free and she was hunted down like an animal. "He wants a villain," she whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and a newfound icy rage. "Fine, I'll show him what a villain looks like." She knew she couldn't just walk into a police station. Marcus had the best defense attorneys money could buy, even now. If she surrendered, they would tear her apart. They would claim the documents she sent were forged. They would claim she manipulated the accounts. Without hard, irrefutable digital forensics, it was her word against a man who had charmed Wall Street for 2 decades. She didn't need a lawyer. She needed a ghost. Elena opened a browser she had installed weeks ago, one that routed her connection through a labyrinth of servers in Estonia, Panama, and Singapore. She accessed the dark web, not the sensationalized version she'd seen in movies, but the boring, bureaucratic underbelly of the internet, where information was the only currency that mattered. She navigated to a forum called the Grey Ledger. It was an invite-only message board for forensic accountants, corporate spies, and grey hat hackers, people who operated in the moral twilight. She posted a query, vague enough to avoid flags, but specific enough to attract talent. Need deep-dive metadata extraction on a 2019 corporate server structure. Focus on user authentication logs and IP geolocation history. High urgency. Payment in BTC. Within an hour, her inbox pinged. The user's handle was Watchtower. No avatar, no bio, just a reputation score that was impossibly high. "I've seen the news, Mrs. Sterling," the message read. Elena froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't used her name. How did he know? "Don't worry," the second message came, seconds later. "I'm not a snitch. I'm an archivist, and I know a sloppy PR spin when I see one. Your husband's defense team is good at storytelling, but bad at math. If you want to bury him, you don't need a narrative. You need the logs." Elena exhaled, her breath fogging in the chilly cabin air. "What's your price?" $50K. Half now, half upon delivery. And I want the story, the real one, not for the press, for me. I like to know who I'm arming." Elena didn't hesitate. She transferred $25,000 worth of Bitcoin from her cold storage wallet to the address Watchtower provided. It was a terrifying amount of money to lose if this was a scam, but she was past the point of caution. She was fighting for her son's future. "I need to prove I didn't set up Vista Holdings," she typed, her fingers flying across the keys. "Marcus claims I created the shell company to siphon funds. He says I signed the documents digitally in November 2019. I need to know who was actually logged into the system and where they were." "Give me 48 hours, Watchtower replied. "Go dark. Do not log in. Do not check your email. I'll find you." The next 2 days were an agony of suspension. Elena paced the small cabin until she wore a path in the rug. She played with Leo, building towers of wooden blocks only to knock them down, her mind thousands of miles away. Every sound outside, the crack of a branch under the weight of snow, the wind howling through the pines, sounded like FBI agents, or worse, Marcus's private security goons coming to silence her. She barely ate. She barely slept. She replayed her marriage in her head, looking for the clues she had missed. The late nights, the business trips, the way he would lock his phone when she entered the room. It all seemed so obvious now. She hadn't been a wife. She had been a cover story. On the evening of the second day, her laptop screen woke up on its own. A secure chat window opened. "It's done," Watchtower wrote. "And Elena, you're going to want to sit down for this." A file began to download. Sterling Forensic Audit, Nov 19 Haunowantos PDF. Eleanor clicked it open. It was a dense document filled with server logs, IP strings, and authentication keys. It looked like gibberish to the untrained eye, but Watchtower had highlighted the relevant sections in red, adding plain English notes in the margins. The creation of the Vista Holdings Signatory Authority occurred on November 14, 2019, at 3:42 a.m. Est, the note read. The user logged in as Esterling Gas Admin. This is why the feds think it was you. It's your login. Elena's stomach dropped. So he wins, she typed back, tears stinging her eyes. Keep reading, came the reply. She scrolled down. However, the note continued, I pulled the device fingerprint for that session. The login didn't come from your usual MacBook Air in Connecticut. It came from a device identified as Marcus iPad Pro Gen 3. And here is the kicker. I cross-referenced the IP address, 202.175 text, with global geolocation databases. Elena stared at the location on the map Watchtower had attached. The Venetian Macau Resort Hotel. Macau, China. Unless you were in a casino in China on November 14th, 2019, using your husband's iPad, Watchtower wrote, then you didn't sign those papers. Elena stared at the date. November 14th, 2019. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The snow outside, the cabin, the baby sleeping in the corner. It all faded away. She was pulled violently back into the past. She remembered November 14th. She wasn't in China. She wasn't even at home. She was in the intensive care unit of Greenwich Hospital. She remembered the smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor that had suddenly, terrifyingly, gone silent. She remembered the doctor's face, a kind, older woman named Dr. Aris, looking down at her with pity. She had been 6 months pregnant with her first child. A girl. They were going to name her Sophie. Then came the preeclampsia, the seizure, the rush to the hospital, the emergency surgery. She remembered waking up in a fog of anesthesia and grief, her arms empty, her womb empty. She remembered asking for Marcus, begging the nurses to call him. Mr. Sterling is currently out of the country on a critical business merger, his executive assistant had told her over the phone, her voice clipped and professional. He sends his love and will be back as soon as the deal closes. He says to stay strong. Eleanor had lain there for 3 days, weeping alone in a private room, thinking her husband was sacrificing his emotional well-being to secure their financial future. She had forgiven him for not being there. She had told herself that he was grieving in his own way, by working. But he hadn't been working. He had been in a hotel room in Macau, likely with a woman, logging into her account on his iPad. And while she was losing his daughter, he was using her identity to set up the shell company that would launder his bribe money. He was framing her for a federal crime during her miscarriage. A scream built in Eleanor's throat, raw and primal. It wasn't a scream of sadness. It was the sound of something breaking, the last vestige of her love, her hesitation, her humanity toward Marcus. He hadn't just stolen money. He hadn't just cheated. He had desecrated the worst moment of her life. He had looked at his dying child and his hospitalized wife and thought, this is a great opportunity to set up a fall guy. She stood up, knocking the chair over. She paced the room like a caged tiger, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold the mouse. Elena? The chat box pinged. You there? She sat back down. Her eyes were dry. The tears had evaporated, burned away by a heat that felt like molten lead in her veins. I'm here, she typed. I was in the hospital that day. I lost a baby that day. There was a long pause on the other end. Jesus, Watchtower wrote. Okay, this isn't just evidence anymore. This is a nuclear bomb. This proves identity theft, fraud, and perjury. And it proves malice. If you drop this in court, he doesn't just lose the case, he gets buried under the jail. It's not enough, Elena typed. Not enough? This exonerates you completely. I don't just want to be exonerated, Elena replied, her fingers hitting the keys with deliberate, heavy strokes. I want him to suffer. I want him to lose everything, not just his freedom. I want him to lose his narrative. I want the world to know exactly what kind of monster he is. She looked at the file again. The technical data was perfect, but juries could get bored with IP addresses. They needed a face. They needed a voice to narrate the cruelty she had just uncovered. She thought about the other woman, Chloe, the mistress who had mocked her on the phone, the 23-year-old who had laughed when Marcus left his pregnant wife on Christmas Eve. Chloe was a villain in this story too, but villains were often cowards, and cowards could be squeezed. Marcus had discarded Chloe the moment the money ran out. Elena knew Marcus. He wouldn't have been kind about it. He would have blamed Chloe for his distraction, maybe even threatened her. "Watchtower," Elena typed. "I have one more job for you, and for this one I'll pay double. Name it. I need you to find Chloe Davis. I don't care where she is. I don't care if she changed her name. Find her. Hack her phone, her cloud, her DMs. Find the dirt that Marcus has on her, and more importantly, find the dirt she has on Marcus. He's arrogant. He would have bragged to her. He would have texted her things he shouldn't have." "Tracing a burner phone is harder," the hacker replied. "But if she's a Gen Z girl who likes Instagram..." "She left a trail. Give me 24 hours. Eleanor closed the laptop. She walked over to the window and looked out at the frozen lake. The moon was high and bright, casting long, sharp shadows across the snow. She placed a hand on the glass. It was freezing cold. For 6 months, she had been running. She had been the prey, scurrying through the underbrush, hoping the wolf wouldn't catch her scent. She turned back to look at Leo, sleeping peacefully, unaware that his father was a monster. "No more running," she whispered. She went to the closet and pulled out a small, metal lockbox. Inside was the remaining cash from the liquidation. It was still a fortune, but it wasn't about the money anymore. She took out a fresh burner phone and dialed the number for the U.S. Attorney's office in the Southern District of New York. She knew it was 3 a.m. She didn't care. She would leave a message. She wasn't going to turn herself in. Not yet. She was going to negotiate terms. But first, she needed Chloe. She needed the mistress to look the jury in the eye and tell them what Marcus was really doing while his wife was in the hospital. Elena Sterling was dead. Nora Vance was just a mask. The woman standing in the cabin now was something else, entirely. She was the reckoning, and she couldn't wait for the sun to rise. And that is the incredible twisted story of Elena and Marcus Sterling. In the end, Marcus's arrogance was his own prison, long before he ever stepped inside a cell. Elena proved that sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to flip the board and walk away. She gave back the millions to buy something money can't purchase. Peace. What do you think? Did Eleanor do the right thing by returning the money, or should she have kept it all? And what about the mistress? Chloe, was she a hero for testifying, or just saving her own skin? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of a story, please smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a drama. I'll see you in the next video.